So I'm looking forward to this too. So, first of all, I apologize for the very solipsistic start, very egocentric, but kind of please look at my photo for a bit. Or, to make it easier for you, I've got exactly the same kit on today. What do you notice? What's the first thing you notice? Sorry? They're fake books, yes, this is true. But they're not here today, so how about...
The yellow shirt.
Yellow shirt? What about the yellow shirt?
It's different colour of this.
Yeah, it's true, that's not a great photo. Okay. It has pockets! Absolutely! It has pockets. So if you do not know why we are celebrating the fact that this has pockets, you need to be here to help to understand, to put yourself in somebody, not somebody else's jumper in this case, somebody else's shoes, right? So there's a little bit of a clothes theme sort of wrapping around this. Absolutely. If you've not been in the situation where you go out and buy clothes and it turns out they don't have pockets, or they have little fake pockets to make it look pretty, or they have little teeny tiny pockets to put your little teeny tiny handkerchief in, but not actually room for a mobile phone or your works pass or your car keys or anything like that, then that's a problem that only some of us face. So, I'm talking about putting yourself in other people's shoes. This is the most wordy slide you will see from me all day or possibly ever. It's from Twitter. I've seen lots of good tweets today, actually. It's from somebody called Ashley Hunsberger. I don't know Ashley. You do? You're not Ashley. Right. This is a brilliant tweet, right? I suspect it was a conference situation similar to this. Well, not similar to this one, hopefully, in this case, actually. So, Ashley was asking, what are the biggest challenges you're facing at work? I'm guessing from the context this was what do you want to hear about when we're talking to you about stuff? So, the answer to that one, team culture. Okay, so what kind of topics do you not want to see? Soft skills, non-technical skills. So if that's how you feel about conference talks, I was going to say leave now, but actually if that's how you feel about conference talks, you damn well need to stay here. So, Ashley said, how on earth do you address culture without human skills? There is nothing soft about them. They are the hardest. And this is kind of where I got my title from for today's talk, because I replied to this one saying I refuse to use soft skills. I agreed with her about the... Sorry, actually, I don't know Ashley's her pronouns. It's she or them? They? She. Okay, so, yeah, I don't like soft skills, but I don't have a good alternative, which us awkward, because I mistyped it. So, we need something equally brief. Any suggestions? To which I got this lovely suggestion back, humaning skills. So, this came as part of a conversation where humaning was set alongside the computering, not in opposition to, but the two things you need to be able to do this job are computering and humaning. And I think that gets the message across a bit more clearly about the human bit of it. The intentions in using soft skills are generally good. I don't generally hear people talking about somebody having too many soft skills. It's generally in the context of it being a good thing, trademark, but not necessarily everybody meaning the same thing by it. So that explains where I got the title from, the humaning one. Let's talk about my problem with soft skills as a term. So I searched Google Images for soft and found pictures on the first page that were free to reuse. And these are some of the ones that came up on that first page. I didn't hunt around for the best ones, just grabbed three that kind of fitted together nicely off the first page. We've got soft ice cream. We've got a nice, delicate, soft feather there. And we've got some soft baby blue wool, some soft white wool, very soft, as you would expect for a search for soft. Very soft things, very, very delicate, very, very sweet. And so I went and looked on thesaurus.com, is it? An online thesaurus, anyway, and picked out the most relevant matches for the word soft, the most relevant synonyms for soft. And this is what I got. So, what have we got in there? We've got that delicacy again, delicate. We've got comfortable and smooth and creamy. We've got easy. Soft is easy, which we've seen from that tweet at the beginning. It's not something I'm going to agree with. Rounded, now I know in this context that's not the kind of rounded they mean, but actually in terms of your skills as a software developer, that's a really good one. My absolute favourite on here is velvety, and I'm very tempted now to go with velvety skills. But in fact, if you want to use that one, please do. But I guess, that's sort of, humaning's probably a little more clear, if you're going to use that. Okay, so this is all the soft ones. So, okay, there's easy in the middle. What do I get? What does it give me as the most relevant antonyms for easy? Which seems to be the most relevant of these words here. The antonyms I get for that, some of them are quite unpleasant characteristics, actually. Unadaptable, intolerant, unpliable. Anyone met anyone like that ever, maybe? Unflexible. So, yeah, these are issues that exist. But also difficult, hard, right? And strong. There's a good strong characteristic to have this one. So difficult and hard. So, okay, let's have a look at the images. What does Google Images tell us about if I search for difficult and hard? And yes, I took my life in my hands. On a side note, I wrote my entire thesis in LaTeX, and I was very good, every time I needed to look up how to do something in LaTeX, going LaTeX document. Except the one time I wanted to insert pictures. Never recovered from that one. Just searched LaTeX pictures. Oh my God. Right. Fortunately, Google Images, much more gentle with me. And I got these kind of things. And I haven't had to sort of filter any of these for content. So I got the physical fitness, the strength thing again. I got the challenging cognitive puzzle. And I got the nice hard engineering, the hard hat, the actual building something solid that you can see type of things in there. So it's quite a different association for those words, hard and difficult. So do you notice here quite a stark difference between those two, very different kinds of thing. So people know what they mean by soft skills, but it's not necessarily the same as what others think of. And the implications of them, as you can see by the implications that's present in those words, very, very different. So what I want to suggest is actually they're not that different. In the sense of software development, you need to be doing both, the computering and the humaning. They come as a pair. It's not a distinction of two different things. So I'm sticking with computering and humoring, but I'm still very tempted by that velvety skills. So, having said there are like two things, computering and humoring, I've stuck in an extra one here. Excuse me for a moment. I've stuck in security because it's actually got some overlaps with both of those, and because I'm now working as a cybersecurity researcher, so it's kind of, obviously I've got to mention that. So, this third aspect is not as independent as it might look. It's got some overlap with the technical measures you've got in place. It's got some overlap with the human ones. So, for example, social engineering is very much about that intersection between security and humans. Firewall is probably in that intersection between computer and security, except that if somebody bypasses it, opens a port, forgets to even put one in the first place, suddenly you're back into the human one. I was trying to think of examples to put in here, and actually found it quite difficult to come up with any that I felt belonged solely in one of these areas. The only one I could think of actually was that in the human one, identifiers. Nobody really cares much about the identifiers except the humans. So the computer doesn't care at all what you call things, right? Maybe there's a little bit of a security issue in terms of if you've misnamed things, people might go a bit wrong. Up in the computer corner, trying to think of something that fits just in there. Maybe resources a bit, but that comes at a cost or in time or money for humans. Maybe algorithms, but then if you're implementing, for example, some AI, which does some face recognition with implications out there in the big wide world, then even that one's not completely independent of it. So there's I've drawn it here with a big overlap between them. Right? So there's a big overlap in the middle, big overlap between the sections. But what happens in real life can look more like this, a much smaller overlap, where some of these relationships between these things get overlooked or downplayed, and people are focusing in the computer area or the human area. So I was really excited listening to Chris this morning. Thank you for a lovely keynote. that whole business of developer experience is that computer and human overlap, and that's really important to doing that computer bit. So this is way too small an overlap for that. But also back to those metrics, measurable things, right? The core thing, the most measurable thing is, have you shipped it? A shipped product with some features is a very tangible outcome. And that's basically what a lot of management want. Understandably, it's what a lot of customers want as well. Shipped product, if we're not actually building a thing and shipping it, we haven't got very far. So, that's a nicely measurable thing, which is a problem. Because from the point of view of that shipped thing, you could consider the human bit optional. It kind of gets a look in there. Actually, things have improved, I think, on the whole user experience, usability area since I started doing this as a software developer quite a long time ago. Let's not go into exactly how far ago. So I think the users get a bit more of a look in now, but devs don't. So, what you're measuring when you're measuring time and progress is the time spent now, the benefits of those human things, really hard to measure. If I could come up with a way to measure the impact of developers on other developers, whether at the same time or in the future, I could make my fortune. Unfortunately, I can't think of a way to do that. The computer doesn't care. The features are essential. You've got to ship those, and therefore the human bit can be treated as something that's not important and core part of what you're doing. Which explains, actually, some attitudes of management to refactoring where they go, well, haven't you already got that? The only point, as far as I can see, of refactoring is for that human segment. Because again, the computer doesn't care. If you want to tell me an example where the computer does care about refactoring, fair enough, but most of the time, it's for the humans. Security, also the same, right? Unless you're working on something, if you've got an area like banking, then it's probably right up there with your features, you would hope, or you're not going to last very long as a bank. But for other things, it's a kind of nice-to-have, add-on peripheral thing. It's not there front and center as a visible characteristic of what you should have. It's not an easy thing to measure. Some of the measurements you can do on it are quite expensive to do. You can do pen testing on it. That's not going to come cheap. It's quite hard to figure out, right? And people are trying to break your system by sneaking in through cunning ways of using it that you haven't thought about. You've then got to try and figure that out. You can't be sure that you've done that. You can't get a measurement for test coverage on that in terms of how many of the security vulnerabilities have I exposed. If you knew that, you'd get rid of them, right? So these things are hard to measure, and if you can measure them, they can be expensive to measure, and they can be treated as an optional extra because they're not about getting the thing out the door. So, what I want to talk about today is that bit of my diagram. The computer-human bit, lots of stuff has been done on human-computer interfaces over the years, partly, I think, because psychologists and the like who are interested in what people are doing with computers can see that bit. It's very visible. But what we all know is that there's a whole lot of use going on of what other people have done within the process of software development. You're using other people's APIs. You're working on the same project. You can't build a thing in isolation. It's all too big and complicated to do that. Somebody else is doing build. Somebody else is... Again, Chris was talking about when things had gone wrong. It might be in your staging area, isn't it? Is it what I've done wrong, or is it something that's gone wrong out in there? There's an awful lot of dependencies on what other people are doing, what other devs are doing. That's been rather a lot overlooked. I think partly because if you look at it from the psychology side, the users they're seeing for code are end users of the compiled code that's actually running on the system. And people on the computing side go, oh yeah, we've got a problem here. Let's build a tool. So the solution is not to be looking at, if you look at it from the computing side, it's always another, let's build a tool to address it rather than let's understand the problem. So I am interested particularly in that overlap between computer and human. That comes from my background as a software developer, where I just said one too many times, why on earth did they do that? And also because that led me into studying psychology and then doing my PhD in psychology of software development. That led me into the job in teaching cybersecurity, and that's where I ended up with the cybersecurity bit coming into my portfolio. So I have to include a bit of security in there. So there are other bits around the edges there that I'm not covering. Those are the ones I'm focusing on today. Security also needs that seeing things from another perspective, just like understanding the users of your source code requires some understanding, so does security. Some examples I want to cite you. There's a doll which can speak to your child and can be programmed to do that with a nice wireless connection. What could possibly go wrong? Square Cash, I don't know if it's still about, a payment system whereby you could send small peer-to-peer amounts of payment and send a message saying, like, here's that £5 I owe you from Saturday. Or, if you're an abusive ex, you can use it to send a very small amount of cash and an abusive message. And there's no way of blocking those messages because that wasn't designed for those misuses. It was designed to send a friend some cash, right? But the misuses are always potentially there and not always considered. What else? Frauds, all kinds of frauds, and you only need to watch the news. There'll be some cyber fraud coming up on a regular basis. And Ashley Madison, I was going to say, anyone remember Ashley Madison? I don't mean as a victim of the Ashley Madison thing. Ashley Madison was I'm not sure, dating site, more of a cheating site, I think, than dating site, which had a massive data breach a few years back. So all these things can go wrong because people are not thinking about the cybersecurity aspect of things and how understanding how other people will use things is important in that. So, I said I wanted to talk about developers in the computering and humaning section. Recognize this acronym? What is it? You ain't gonna need it. Right. So, it kind of goes hand in hand for me with what problem are you trying to solve? Figure out what problem you're trying to solve and solve that problem. So why am I talking about Yagni? This is why I'm talking about Yagni. Does anyone know what this one means? Good. So it's now mine, right? This is going to catch on. Can Greek people pronounce this better? Is there some scope in this? So, Makinion. Lovely, they are. Makinion. Maintainers ain't going to know if you needed it or not. So, you can't be sure. In the research that I did, I talked to a lot of experienced software developers. And one of the issues they reported was just finding their way through the code, fighting their way through a jungle, bashing their way through the weeds, trying to see what's what in there. I'm hoping that, well, I don't want to say I hope it's a familiar scenario. I wish it wasn't. But is that on a familiar scenario, right? What on earth is this? What's going on? So, and you can't be sure. And if you find something and you're not sure if it's needed or not, it's really risky to remove it. If there's some tests around, then that might help you figure it out. But it's really hard to figure out what's there, is it needed, what we're going to do with it. So, who was talking about somebody? This. I went to a very lovely talk on cynicism, where one of the bits of advice was basically don't beat up on people who wrote the legacy code that you're working with. Because I've got this hourglass here. When you're writing a piece of code, there's a whole load of stuff you know. Stuff about the context, the team you've got, the customer, the constraints that you're under, various pre-existing things, what's needed, the requirements. There is a whole load of information that you have in your head, enormous. And you have a very challenging job. This is why they pay good money for it. You've got to take all that knowledge about the world and what's going on and condense it into lines of code, which are a very, very bare way of representing all that massive knowledge that you've got. And some things are going to be obvious to you, so you won't bother mentioning them anywhere. You may or may not be writing documents about it, But even so, if you write a document, it's still an abstraction of all that stuff that's in your head. And you may miss things out. Some things will still be obvious to you, and you won't think to mention them. It can't capture all of it. And unfortunately, we can't just sort of download it onto a stick and then upload it into the brain of the next person who comes along to maintain it. That would be awesome, wouldn't it? Or would that be creepy? Both, probably. Right, so it's a really challenging job. And it's also a very challenging job for the person who comes along and they see that code and maybe a bit of documentation, but they can't be sure if that's up to date. Was it Peter Sommerlath said? Only the code tells the truth, right? And ultimately, that's the bit that's out there running. I think I have to agree with him on that one. So, a challenging job, and to make any changes to it, to fix it or amend it, extend it, you need to fight through those weeds, figure out what's going on in there, and somehow try and reinstate in your brain at least some of that knowledge that was there for the person creating it, so that you know and understand how to go forwards with that. What do you need to do from there? So, obviously with an hourglass, all those bits of sound do reassemble into a broadly triangular shape at the bottom, but that's not going to be exactly the same as the order they were in up at the top. You're doing your best to recreate it from what you can see in the artifacts that have been left behind. Anyone old enough to know what this, or geeky enough maybe to recognise this one? So, what kind is it?
6502.
No? It was allegedly, well, yeah, I didn't double check, allegedly 6800 Motorola. But anyway, yeah, long time ago, right? I've written some of this professionally in my time. It's quite hard. You know, there's not a lot of abstraction in there. It's very kind of down to the metal kind of stuff. There is no way you would write stuff you ain't going to need in that, because it's hard enough to write the stuff you are going to need. Now, don't go back quite this far. Anyone want to admit to going back quite this far? So back in ye olden days, code used to be written by having a coding sheet, and you would take your pencil and you would fill in code on the coding sheet, and that would be taken to the punch card room. My sister used to work as a punch card operator, and you put that in through the slot, and they sit there with their keyboard creating punch cards that then go into the machine. They're like the Jacquard loom cards, little holes in there control what happens in the machine. So, you're really not going to write a lot of stuff that you don't need when you're sitting there doing with a pencil and paper. If you can do copy and paste, you've got a kind of different scenario. So, it's too easy, it's too fast. One of the things that can help with that came out very much from the research I was doing, is that automation is a great thing. And not just because you can come along and make it easy and press the button, but because if you've got automation of some of that stuff that you know, some of the things you know how to make happen in that top half of the hourglass, and you put that into some kind of script that reproduces it, the knowledge that you had at that point is documented and in an executable form that is therefore tested every time you run it. So there are some clues there that help you sort out which things are weeds and which things are plants. So if you're a budding gardener, you need to know which ones are the weeds, right? This is the kind of thing that can help give you those clues. In a similar vein, because I'm creating acronyms to spread around the world, and we're talking about weeds. Weeds proliferate in the rain, right? You don't want those weeds, so keep it dry. I mean, I know that doesn't work terribly well because then you starve your plants as well, but, and all the analogies break somewhere. So, for example, somebody told me about two 300-line functions. Let's not go into the 300 lines bit. That's a whole other can of worms, which would be good for the garden, which were identical, but for UDP and TCP. That was the only difference between them. So, thank you. I'm doing okay so far. Sprained ankle, but if I suddenly keel over, just someone perch me on the stool. Right, so that was the only difference between them, right? Crying out for not having the repetition. System I worked on one time had 5 different implementations of linked lists in it, so they weren't quite copying and pasting it, they were just not looking at what was already there. And I mean, in fact, there shouldn't have been any implementations of linked lists in there. They should have just been using something out of a library. But actually, no, they had 5 hand-knitted ones in there. And also in, oh, crumbs, that was in the same system. Funnily enough, this is the last system I was working on before I quit to go and study psychology. There's some clues in there, right? There were some things that were reading in some commands and parsing a string, all extremely similar, except the commands were just slightly different. So there were at least 12 different, extremely similar but not quite string parsers in there. And actually all I could do at that point was just go and add another one, because it was in that awful situation of, yeah, we've already got one of these, just do another one. And this is kind of one of the reasons I stopped doing software development for a living, because I hated doing that, and I could never get people to let me. I was just too much of a good girl, really. I should have just gone ahead and done it anyway and refactored it, but there you go. You live and learn. Right. Weddery. Oh, yeah. I think I can probably pronounce that one. Any guesses for weddery? Where else did you repeat yourself? So you might not notice at all that it's happened. So if you come along and fix something in one instance of this, you're not going to fix the others. You might happen to notice there's another one. The moment you've noticed there are 2, then you're asking yourself, okay, are there some more? How many are over these? In that case, I had 12-ish. I mean, I stopped counting by the time I got to that number. So that's another issue of ploughing through the weeds, sorting out what's there, what isn't there, what do we need to worry about here? Have we fixed this in all the places? Is there another weed hidden somewhere that we need to go and pull out? But it's also great for illusory productivity. If you want to make it look like you've done something, wow, if you've written a 300-line function to do UDP, and you can create something to do the TCP bit by just a copy, paste, and literally this one was just a search and replace. There was no functionality difference in it at all, just the naming. Crazy. But nice way of making it look like you've been productive, especially if you're in an environment where they don't understand that less code is a good thing. Which brings me to the Rockstar Developer. So it's quite a handy tool, I think, or maybe a handy instrument in the Rockstar's toolkit to be able to create loads of code just by copying and pasting it and not thinking about it. And also sort of not caring about whether or not somebody else is going to read it. So that can make them allegedly 10 times more productive. Now, I would argue about the 10 times, but actually I thought about it and concluded it's true. They cause 10 times as much work for everybody else. But it's back to that measurement issue again. You can measure their productivity in getting stuff out the door. You can't measure how much impact that has on everybody else. So they're not a myth, they are real, but this is their effect. Loads of rubbish scattered through the place that other people then have to pick through. There's a big thing going on with, conferences, festivals now, to recycle stuff that's left behind. So they've got to have volunteers going through this, looking through all the waste that's there, seeing what's useful, what can be recycled, what should go into the hazardous waste, going through old code that's written without care for other humans can be like going through this rubbish. So, I'm talking here about consideration for peers in software development, right? Here's a recent tweet from my friend Chris. They have their own work to do. Discuss. Is this an example of consideration for your peers? Well, at one level, yes, because, like I've said, it's a difficult task writing software, especially when you're trying to figure out what somebody else's software did and you're trying to pick through that. So this is a picture of blood flow in the brain. I picked it because I wanted to pick up on the concept of flow, which you may have come across, that beautiful state where you're so immersed in what you're doing, everything's just coming together, you're really in the zone with doing it. I think every programmer's felt it, even if they haven't called it by that name. And it's a lovely place to be, but it's also very hard to reproduce. If you get interrupted out of that, you can't just go straight back into it. It takes a while to get there. So it's a waste if you lose that. So for sure there's an issue about trying to arrange things so that those moments aren't wasted and not to have constant, endless, pointless interruptions. But back to my research participants, I interviewed a lot of experienced people. I interviewed experienced people because any issues they have with what others do are still clearly an issue. If you talk to novices, maybe the problems they have with understanding things in the middle of software development are just because they're novices. And here's a counterintuitive one that they came up with. I gave them some cards. I'll tell you a bit more about the cards in a bit. It's a counterintuitive response that they're basically saying they want to be interrupted. I mean, not at any time, but they want to be interrupted. And I wasn't asking them just what are these things, but also why. And the why for this was because otherwise people go and work on their own in a corner, in isolation, and they come up with something that's strange or inconsistent with what the team's doing or unnecessary, something that's in some way confusing in that context when other people come to look at it. So one of my participants said, they'll go away and reinvent the wheel. And then they'll add an elephant and a spaceship. Which then means, when you're that person going through the rubbish, you find weird things in there. You find a spaceship and go, what's this doing here? What can I do with that? Do we need to keep that? Does that go in the rubbish? What's going on? So, that's what I wanted to say about the software developer side of things. I got to sneak in a little bit about cybersecurity. So here is my cliched, mandatory, obligatory hacker in a hoodie with matrix letters falling down around it. Because you can't talk about cybersecurity without having this, can you? Actually, I have done many a time, and the only time I've ever included is to say, what a pointless rubbish cliche. Because this is not what users are thinking about, right? When they're trying to use a computer, this is not what's on their mind. They are after looking at their messages or seeing what their friends have been up to on holiday. It's a social thing. And I've deliberately chosen archaic images for this because humans is humans, right? Human behavior and human psychology has been pretty much the same for quite a few years now. And we're social animals. We like to keep in touch. We have tasks to do. We like to see what other people are doing, whether it's Instagram or picture postcards, whether it's email or letters or, I don't know, town crier, whatever. We're still communicating with each other. So, these are the things people are doing, and you need to make it easier for them to be secure by default. Someone was talking earlier about something similar. It's slipped my mind now. But it needs to be simple and unobtrusive, right? Like locking their doors. And they're not completely unaware of security. They lock their doors when they leave their homes, things like that. But security is your responsibility as a designer. Somebody was talking about design. It was in that context I was thinking about this. So quick rant about mobile phones, right? If I check email on my phone with a touch screen that I scroll up and down with my finger, I open an email and there's a link in there. If I get that wrong, and let's face it, I have clumsy fingers sometimes, I can accidentally open that link. That's not my fault. I'm not trying to open that link. It's a big thing for cybersecurity. Do not click the link. And then they present me with an interface where accidentally I can click that link. And that's not me being stupid and unaware of the link. That's just the user interface making it really hard for me to do it right. And there are countless other possibilities in that. Just make it easier for them to do. They'll meet you halfway with some of it, but that's not what they're there to do. They're not going there thinking guy in hoodie, matrix letters. They're thinking about, my friend is on holiday in Brighton going down to the sea, or whatever. I also talked about asking others, picking up on what my research participants said. This includes making up your own arbitrary rules as an reinvented wheel with added elephants and spaceships. So make it easy for the user to be secure, right? They've got a limited memory. They're human. It's not limited memory because they're flawed. They are not a computer. There's only so much they can remember. So if you're asking them to put in weird characters and have something unmemorable, or if you're asking them to change their password ever so frequently, they're going to forget it. And then they're going to write it down. So this particular post-it is actually on my screen at Portsmouth because My boss was coming in to the office for the first time after I'd gone there. I thought it would be quite funny to actually stick a password on my screen. That is not my password. So, but yeah, no, I thought, I just wait and see if they notice what I've done there. So, yeah, but you can't all be security experts, that's fine. But you need to recognize whether you are or not know your skills. And there are people out there who can do that. So the National Cybersecurity Centre suggests that for home users, 3 random words is an appropriate rule, for appropriate guidance for setting a password. If it's 3 words, it's quite long. If it's random words, it's not going to be guessable by being your pet's first name or your stripper name or whatever, formed from the road where you first lived or whatever. All those sort of bits of information about you that can be so easily harvested in the name of fun. So, and for home users, that's probably good enough. It's probably better than what they're already doing. It's certainly better than having a post-it on there. So we're back to Yagni again, really. Yagni for the threat model. And think about so if you've got a very serious, big thing with an advanced persistent threat coming after you, maybe that's not what you need. But for somebody logging into their email at home or something like that, that's probably better than what they're already doing. But also, ask about that. Don't reinvent the wheel with that. There are good libraries out there. Do not go and hand-knit your own crypto. Cryptography is a big and complex subject, and if you go knit your own without knowing what you're doing, you're going to do it wrong. So ask. Don't go sit in that corner and go, oh, I need to salt and hash this, so I'll write a salt. I'll write a hash. Rather. Just don't. Ask. I mean, don't, full stop. Ask. Suddenly, yeah, I don't want that one to come out wrong. My career could be over at that point. Right. So, some of these issues, people having done weird stuff, can be spotted in code reviews. Please don't let your code reviews be like this, with the daggers out. Please make it about the code and not the person. It's a great opportunity for teaching, if you do it nicely. A mentoring, collaborative thing, where actually you can share and discuss those ideas and spread knowledge of your code base. If you're teaching, these days we don't hit people with canes generally and sort of scrawl all over their work in red. So don't be like that about it. Your mileage may vary, your experience will vary, so be respectful about it and share those things. But it's not just about teaching, right? There's scope for learning in there. It might be something you haven't seen before. You've got an opportunity to learn about other bits of the code base. There's absolutely scope here for juniors reviewing stuff by more senior developers. It gives them that knowledge of the code base. It creates an opportunity for mentoring. If a junior comes along and says, oh, well, why did you do it like that? It's a bit strange. You can explain why. But also, it stops you being that arrogant rock star who just writes sort of, I don't know, all sorts of stuff. I've been speaking to a lot of developers lately and asking, in further research, asking them what elegant means to them, amongst other things. And they keep saying simple when I say elegant. And I go, so what's simple then? One way you can find out whether or not it's simple is have someone more junior review it. It's a really good test of does it make sense to somebody else by having somebody else without the same experience as you look at it. So, I mentioned my research. I've actually got the cards here that I used to do that. This, just to put in context those cards that I showed you earlier. I interviewed lots of people, but using those cards to make sure I covered the whole breadth of things, from build and bug reporting, that kind of thing. I wanted to mention this because what I did with that, good software developer, I'm not going to do this and put this on the shelf as a catalogue of here's some ideas. I wanted to do something with it. So I took quotes from what people said to me in gathering those thoughts about what makes your job harder as a programmer, what makes your job easier, that other people do to affect you. Gave all those quotes to people to look at, free choice to pick up whichever one they wanted, and then talk about why. With some simple rules of no sacred cows. So you can't choose this because it's good practice. You've got to explain why it matters to you. The donkey there, is there as an ass because I asked them to make no assumptions. This is where you need Chris Oldwood, the master of the pun. So no assumptions about why this thing matters. You've got to explain why it matters. And finally, the steamroller, because I was asking people to talk about their experience. How does it affect them? What is the impact on them? And they're the expert on that. So you can't plough in and say, oh, no, that's not right, because their experience is their experience. So there's something about having those words there from other people that sort of legitimizes it, right? This comes from people with a lot of experience, and it's not saying, oh, I hate it when Paul does this, or something like that. It's, though I do. No, I haven't actually worked with Paul, so we're okay. But it's, this is things that people in the industry have said. So, nice way of getting humans to talk about stuff. And this is a review at a broader level, right? So not reviewing lines of code. This is reviewing your team's practices from a much, as a whole. It's not a retrospective. Retrospectives, I think, I'm not saying they're not useful, but they're focused more on what you're doing with those iterations. This is a step back completely from that and going, how do we do this? And people really recommended this. They would pick out whichever card meant something to them. They would talk about that around the table. And lots of teams came up with something that they could do differently. And it was a known problem. They didn't come up with new things they hadn't discovered. They just hadn't stopped and talked about it and gone, you know what, we could prevent this. Because we're all problem solvers, right? On a day-to-day basis, you just get on and solve that problem and move on. Whereas actually, you could do something more systemic to fix it. So I also have those cards with the quotes on here if you want to have a look. And the materials are online, so you can run that for yourself. Or if you'd like me to come and facilitate a session for you, we could talk about that as well. Okay, finally, heading back towards wrapping it up with the clothes. It's kind of a privilege not to have to worry about your pockets, ironically. So check your privilege, be supportive, be an ally to other people. I'm lucky enough that I can, people do not misgender me. I gather from friends who are misgendered that it stings. And I really try hard not to do it, but if I've known them under a different pronoun, I find it quite hard to adjust. But that's kind of my problem, and I'm working on that one and trying to get better at it. It's really not too much to ask, though, that you get their pronoun right. Also, if you find yourself at a conference that's got stickers like these ones I put on here, it's really nice if you can put one on your badge as well. So you don't have to be labelled as different by the very fact that you've got a pronoun sticker. If everyone's doing it, yeah, okay, I might be obviously a she. Actually, maybe I'm not. But the more people are doing it, the less it's othering those people. So that's kind of not too much to ask. Also, this is something I really want you guys to consider, right? So please tell me somebody didn't like me saying guys there. Because it's, I mean it inclusive. Thank you, yes. Good. I used it, thank goodness, deliberately. And if you're using guys and saying, yeah, but I mean it inclusively, just ask yourself, how many guys have you dated? And if that doesn't help you figure that one out, then let's talk. Okay, so finally, wrapping it up back to the pockets. I have here, I was going to wear it, but it's just too horrible to have this thing around your neck. I have here a necktie. How can anybody wear these things? They're horrible. But I have it because I worked on some projects where it was the project Memento. It was what you got given at the end of a project. And it was these or nothing. So this is a picture of me looking extremely unimpressed with this as a memento. That is the only time I've ever worn it. But at least I finally got a use from it, even if it's only to make a rhetorical point years later. Right? So, it's all part of putting yourself in the other person's shoes, or necktie, or whatever. But putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. This extends to things like gifts and mementos. I went to PyCon UK a couple of years ago. Well, I've been to a lot of PyCon UKs. But they were doing speaker gifts of socks that were also puppets. So these amazing sock puppets, such fun. They were fabulous. I sound like that woman out of Miranda now. Such fun. But yeah, I mean, wonderful. A non-gendered gift, a lot of fun. You may or may not wear them, but kind of everyone's got feet. Everyone probably gets cold feet sometimes. It's great to be able to put socks on. So, socks go on feet. Feet go in shoes. Put yourself in other people's shoes. Thank you.